Welcome to the second part of the episode with Dr. Sid Warrior. I'm sure you will learn and love this episode because of the depth of dialogue. Enjoy it and do write to us with your thoughts. Keep meditating.
Correct.
I also want to talk a little bit about, most diseases these days are attributed to being psychosomatic in many ways. Even when you talk about, like, I keep listening to Luke as well, right? And he does heartfulness. And he often says that a lot of his cancer patients, when they start to meditate, they feel like they're healing. They feel much better. Even chemo or other external treatments react to their body in a far more positive way vis-a-vis when they were feeling down and out about just having cancer and life coming to an end.
Mhm.
So I would like to know your view on this, and how have you seen some of this play out in your journey?
So every disease has a psychological component because we suffer as a whole. We don't suffer
Yeah,
just in the body. We don't suffer just in the mind. If you're suffering in the mind, your body will suffer because it's all connected. So
true.
if I have fever, then I will have the psychological symptoms that go with fever. I will feel low, मुझे mood नहीं है, I don't want to work, I'm feeling tired. All of those things are partly biological, partly psychological. And
True.
one of the problems is that people think psychological means not real, which is absolutely untrue. That's not
Yeah.
that's not the case because psychology is actually what makes things real. So if you are suffering from any disease, how much you suffer does depend on the intensity of the disease and how your psychology is how your
Receiving
psychology is
it.
receiving it, right? How your mind
Yeah.
is receiving it, right? So two people with the same amount of injury will not feel the same amount of pain
Interesting.
because they will perceive pain differently. Pain is a very subjective experience.
Yeah.
There are soldiers who say that they got shot in the war and they never felt it during the fight because their adrenaline is high, their mind is somewhere else. They don't feel pain in that moment. Later
Yeah.
on, of course, they'll feel pain. So pain is very subjective. How much pain you let in into your consciousness is very subjective to that moment, to that person. So how much you suffer is also subjective. That doesn't mean the suffering is not real. It is real to
True.
that person. So when somebody comes in with psychosomatic complaints and say that, my back is hurting and the MRI is normal, that doesn't mean that back is not hurting because for them it is real. It just means that we haven't found the correct cause for it,
Yeah.
right? So this understanding is extremely important. So when somebody has cancer, it doesn't mean that only their body has cancer.
No, but
Their
sorry, I want to go back to that backache, and I'll tell you why. Because I think a lot of people, when they feel stress, it manifests in their body in these ways. And, we had a yoga teacher who came in and very clearly said that, Sharan, she really spoke about the fact that when you feel stress, it shows up in your neck, in your back. And so, to your point about the MRI is clear, but the pain is there. Now, what would you suggest to that person who came over to you? What should they go out and do? Because very often people just stop there and be like, अच्छा ठीक हो जाएगा थोड़ा stretching कर लूंगी, and you'll be okay. But that's not what it is. It's obviously something in your mind that you need to fix.
No, absolutely. So every problem needs to have a diagnosis. That in the end, why is this there?
Yeah.
So we cannot stop just because the MRI is normal. We still need to look ahead. We still need to understand. Calling it psychosomatic is good, but then we still need to understand where is that psychological stress coming from and solve that. Because
Correct.
ultimately, what is our aim? That the patient should be pain free.
Yes.
That's
And
the
live a
ultimate
healthy
aim.
life.
Correct.
Yeah.
Our aim is not to have a normal MRI. That's not the aim. The
Yeah.
aim is to have the patient live better. So just because the MRI is normal doesn't mean your responsibility is over.
Sure.
Because it still means that we have to now find out what is bothering him. If you can't, then find a therapist who can.
Yeah.
Refer the patient to a therapist because there is a reason. Everything has a reason. Whether you find it or not is subjective, but everything has a reason. And so if you find the reason, like if you diagnose something properly, the treatment becomes easy. I always feel like the diagnosis is the hardest part of medicine.
True.
Once you diagnose, anyone can treat. Treatment
Yeah.
is very clear cut. It is the
Yeah.
diagnosis that is the problem. So
That's true.
same for psychosomatic problems. And even in cancer, of course, there is a huge psychological component to that suffering.
True.
And things like meditation, yoga, natural retreats, hanging out with your family, having supportive friends, all of these things will help with that. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's curing the cancer. This is where people get stuck. People equate the
Mm.
suffering with the disease. It's not true. So
Yeah.
you might feel better for a while, doesn't mean the cancer is getting treated, because that is a biological problem.
True.
That is happening at a molecular level. So
I understand.
that is where mistakes happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. I also now want to talk a little bit about, how can we stay sharper? How can we stay better in our
Mhm.
minds? And you talk a lot about the flow state. And I think for me, that's been also, I've experienced it. As I was saying, I play golf. I used to compete earlier. And there were days when I played my best golf and it felt like it was the easiest round of golf, right? I got off the 18 holes feeling like I can go out there and play another 18. And then there were days where the 18 holes felt like they would never end, right? And you almost felt like the game and you were just the same. You were in that moment. You weren't getting ahead of yourself of what will happen if I don't hit this shot well. It's
Yeah.
almost like you're in the zone, what you call in the zone, where everything just feels like it's meant for you, it's working for you, it's going your way.
Yeah.
In life too, there are moments when you feel that way, but more often than not, you feel like it's a struggle.
Yeah.
And so, what have you realized or what do you see when you show up to work every day? How are you able to recreate that flow state? Is there a way to recreate it? And if there is, then how can we do more of it in our day to day life?
Yeah. So flow state has a few components to it. Um, One is that our prefrontal cortex, so there is hypofrontality. So this is a EEG finding in flow state, that there is less activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the most evolved part of the brain, which is where all the calculations happen. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're in flow state, you are not consciously calculating too much. A layman word of way of saying this is that you're not overthinking.
Yeah,
So that's what overthinking is. If I
sure.
do this, then this will happen, and so this will happen, and so this will happen. You're trying to logically predict what will happen. Whereas in flow state, you're not logically trying to predict it. You know what will happen. So
So
the
is that also overthinking is also, do you think is a function because we want constantly control, whereas flow is a lot about letting go and just letting things happen? Would you say it's like that?
yes, so when you this urge for control is always going to be there. But what happens is that when you try something new, that urge for control is associated with fear of what will happen if this doesn't go my way.
True.
And fear will automatically make you overthink. It will make you
Hmm.
calculate more and more.
That's
And
your
as
monkey mind.
That's a monkey mind. And as fear keeps increasing, it's a very interesting shift. So, as fear keeps increasing, your prefrontal cortex keeps thinking more and more and more. And then there is a point beyond which it suddenly stops thinking and everything becomes emotional. But
Hmm.
that is also not flow state. So, flow state is not defined only by whether your prefrontal cortex is thinking or not. The flow state is defined by hypofrontality and very low sympathetic activity, in that you are not threatened, you are
Hmm.
not afraid, you are not worried. So you are very calm. You are not worried about losing control.
True.
So it is another level of control where you understand your role in the larger scheme of things. And you
Very well
are,
said.
yeah, so you are just, the connection between thought and action is unidirectional. There are no circular loops. There are
Yeah.
no, but what if I fail? But what if the shot doesn't work? Nothing like that. It's just me. I have the golf stick in my hand. I need to shoot. I will shoot. I know
Yeah.
how to do it. So that will only come if you've shot enough number of times that the basics are taken care of.
Of course. Of course.
So you
The
cannot
skill set
achieve
has
flow
to be
state.
there. Yeah.
Exactly. You cannot achieve flow state on day one because you're still learning. But if you
Yeah.
keep on doing this, it becomes very easy, which is why a lot of people achieve flow state while running, because the
True.
skill set is easy. You've been running your whole life. Once you develop stamina, you don't need to do much. You're constantly acting, 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 and then your brain starts to drift,
Yeah.
and you're just in the zone. And that is when people find running very meditative. Swimming can be very meditative. So that's also a flow state. Where you're just doing that action, you're doing it well. You don't need to think about how to swim, and your body is just having a mind of its own.
Yeah, there's a sense of automatism, right, where you
Yeah.
just get into that zone and you keep going. um do you feel like you're able to, are there any things that you've architected so that you can get into that at your workplace or in your life?
Mm. So one thing I always try and do is have little rituals.
Yeah.
So I have seen this from Magnus Carlsen, who was the former world champion of chess. Whenever he sits down for playing a match, he would do this thing where he would arrange all the pieces of his side of the chessboard in a particular way. He will arrange them in the center, and then
Yes.
he will start playing.
Yes.
So just that action is like a little trigger to allow him to get into that zone. I find that very, very useful. So even when I've started doing this in my OPD, when I sit in the hospital, there are certain things that I do. That I take out my pen, I arrange my prescription pad, I keep my mobile in a particular place, and I just clean the desk for like 30 seconds, and then
Yeah.
I say, okay, send the first patient. So whatever was my state of mind before, I might be frustrated, I might be angry, I might be talking to somebody, but I do that, and it's like this self hypnosis thing
Hmm.
where you've trained yourself to get into a certain state of mind just with that physical action. And I find that very useful.
I couldn't agree more. It's like you do this and boom, now I'm here. And now
Yep.
I will just in the present moment and I will do this. And you're so right, because I think sport has really also taught me that, where routine and certain things that we do, as even you can call it a ritual, allows you to be in that moment. Like I remember, when you play golf, you put your glove in your left hand and there's a Velcro that shuts the glove.
Yeah.
Just the sound of that Velcro became like a trigger for me. Every time I heard that, your mind just sort of gets into that zone to be in
Lovely.
that moment.
Lovely.
Um, I also want to understand from you, now we're getting a lot of help from external sources, right, to
Yeah.
explore this unexplored part of our mind, and you have, why don't you go get, monitored or supervised ayahuasca, or why don't you go try
Yeah.
LSD, or why don't you go try other substances? And I'm not talking about substance abuse. I'm just saying using it to explore and go into emotional spaces which you can't do consciously.
Yeah.
And I find that those are very interesting ways of doing it. I'm very intrigued by it, and I'm also very curious. So I want to understand what's your take on it. And I have heard transformation stories around that. I want to know from you what goes into it, and does it really open up a different side of your mind?
So people will explore, like we spoke about before.
Yeah,
The need to explore, or the urge to explore, is so inherent in human beings that there will be a large percentage of people in the world who will want to explore new territories.
yeah,
And that's how we got till here, by the way. If
sure.
human beings weren't exploratory, we wouldn't have become the dominant species of the world, right? Because
Yeah,
we wanted to explore, we found new resources everywhere we went. Um, the mind is this whole world that we haven't explored. And if you give somebody a way to explore the mind, they will. So that's why people want to get high. That's why people want to experience psychedelic effects, because they're experiencing something they've never experienced before.
true.
The problem happens when some of those chemicals are chemically addictive.
Yeah,
That is where the dangers happen. So going for a run or exploring new territory, the first people who took a boat and went to find India, that's not an addictive thing. They're
yes,
exploring new things. But these, so drugs like heroin, for example, cocaine. Now these are chemicals that are addictive, that change the way you crave those things. Now those are dangerous. But
yeah,
telling people that they should not explore the limits of their mind, I don't think that holds up. People will do that. It is
true.
not a new thing. Ayahuasca, for example, has been there probably like 3,000 years before modern medicine started. So this idea
True.
that you should not try this is absurd. People will want to explore what is in the periphery of their minds. Now there are very different ways of exploring. So
Yeah.
just like you've heard stories of transformation through psychedelic drugs, there are m- enough number of examples of transformation through meditation, transformation through yoga, transformation through running, right? Transformation through just joining a gym, which is
Yeah.
all exploration. You're pushing the boundaries of what your body and your mind is capable of. So any of these can transform you if you're looking to be transformed. So I fundamentally believe that it's not really that particular thing that made you
So true.
transform. You wanted to, and you happen to find that. Just like how you can read 1,000 self-help books, but when you really want it, the first self-help book you pick will change your life
Because
because
you're ready for it.
because you're ready for it. They all say the same thing.
Yeah.
You read three and you realize they all say the same thing. It's just that you need to be in that state of mind to want it. So that's
Yeah.
my take on these drugs. What is interesting though is that in the last few years there has been a growing awareness that the vilification may have been a little too extreme.
Hmm.
So
Sure.
right, and in a world, now this is really, it gets to me that in a world where alcohol is legal, a chemical that has no medical value whatsoever, it
Yeah.
only has negative value. It has ruined millions of families. It has
So true.
caused so many billions dollars worth of loss for human
Yeah.
society. In a world where that is legal, how dare we say that we cannot even research on the possible benefits of, say, LSD or MDMA? And now that research is coming out, we are finding out that these drugs do have the capacity to help people come out of PTSD, help people come out of depression. Can't we even research it? No, that is absolutely crazy, and I'm very glad that that shift is happening. So
Yeah.
today, in today's time, there was an entire conference that happened, in fact, a few months ago in Norway, which was the
Hmm.
world's largest psychedelic conference, where top researchers from the biggest
Interesting.
universities in the world, medical universities, they all came together, published researchers, and they showed what is the current evidence in using these drugs. So there is a
Yeah.
shift happening for sure.
No, I'm so glad you brought these two things up, because even when you talk about weed, right, where in the US or other parts of the world, it's a very natural form of healing and pain management. We actually go out and prescribe drugs in India to go take pills instead of doing something which is natural and easier on your body. So absolutely. There's also a lot of research around mental well-being and meditation, which you just brought up as well, right? And during COVID, I remember I read a lot of research around how even for doctors and health workers who were extremely stressed, burnt out, meditation helped them deal with the stress better and also prolong the time period that they would get burnt out at.
Right.
What have you seen in your profession, and do you meditate? And if you do, how has that really helped you?
So all injury and recovery is a function of stress levels in your body.
Hmm.
How stressed out your body and your brain is will dictate how much fatigue you feel, how much trauma are you taking up, and how quickly you recover. And
Yeah.
what meditation does is it reduces the stress levels in your body. As simple as that. So is also true for sleep. It's also true for hanging out with your closest family and friends. It's also true for just relaxing with a nice book and, spending some time by yourself. All of these things have benefit.
Yeah.
So even if you do any of these things, that fundamental benefit of reducing stress will affect, will take effect. Meditation specifically, what it does is that it allows you to gain more control over your thoughts. So it's
Yes.
not just stress reduction. Meditation also allows you, it also trains you for emotional regulation. So that is the added advantage over other forms of stress reduction. So even if you're watching Netflix and you're watching your favorite TV show, you will still have stress reduction, but it will not teach you emotional regulation. Whereas
So
meditation
well
does that.
said. For
So that is the
sure.
advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and have you sort of seen any changes, any research that you might have done or read where there are clear positive outcomes for people who meditate and who don't?
Yes, absolutely. There were, I think now there's no doubt about it because meditation clearly reduces amygdala activation. It creates a shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So your
Yeah,
overall your heart rate is lower. Your breathing is better. So there are enough researches now that have happened that show that meditation does have these positive effects.
yeah. Um, Even your job is extremely stressful, right? I mean, you're literally dealing with life and death. You know, we talk about it in a metaphorical sense in our lives, but for you, it truly is that moment which can define life or death for someone.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that stress and anxiety in that moment?
So it helps that we've been through it for enough time because I can very safely say it was much more stressful in my first year of residency than it is today.
Sure. So
Because the
your
first time,
preparation, yeah, so your preparation gives you the confidence to deliver consistently.
correct. So you understand your own equation with death changes. You deal with death differently. You get affected by death differently. And I believe that is a necessary change. Because I often feel that as a doctor, your primary job is to make sure that the patient is better.
Yeah.
And sometimes if you get too caught up or if you get too overwhelmed by the emotions of it, you may not be able to do your job. So
Very true.
part of becoming a good doctor is understanding that this is a serious situation, but I cannot be overwhelmed like everybody else, because then what am I doing here? That's not my role,
Yes. Yes.
right? So when you go to a hospital and your patient is very serious and you are panicking or you are scared or you're crying, you don't want the doctor to be panicking and scared and crying, right? Even
Oh,
if that
no
might be
way.
height of empathy and
Yeah.
you feel like, oh, they're a family member, but then you don't want another family member. You want a doctor,
Yes.
right? So sometimes that's what medical college and being a doctor does train you to do. It trains you to do your job. You start seeing things in a different way, and you start seeing things in a more practical, clear way that this is what needs to be done at this moment. So over time that does help because it gives a little bit of clarity in your mind.
I want to talk a little bit more about death. You said
Mhm.
you deal with death differently now because you've seen so much of it, or maybe
Yeah,
you're in an environment where you know it's an imminent possibility.
yeah.
How do you how did you deal with, maybe the first case when that happened to you, and now, what has changed within you to deal with it better?
The first time it happened when I was a resident, and I had to tell the relatives of a patient who just died. It was extremely difficult because you've never
Yeah,
done that before. You've never had to go out of the ICU and speak to relatives of a patient who just died and inform them that their relative is no more. It was extremely difficult for me. And
yeah,
this is a journey that every single doctor would have to go through at some point, because that is their job. If
sure.
they don't do it, who will? So that is their job, and you have to a get over your own emotions, and b then you have to learn all the necessary skills in order to break that news in a way that reduces the relative's pain as much as possible. So there is this whole skill set called breaking bad news,
Yeah.
and you have
Where
to
you're
learn
managing
it.
yourself and you're
Correct.
managing external
Correct.
people.
And you have to learn it. You have to learn it like any other skill. You have to be efficient at it because that's the only way you become good at anything. And you do
Yeah.
want to be good at this. You don't want to be bad at this. You want to be able to handle people crying. You want to be able to handle their emotions, not lose your own emotions, not get angry, not get upset, not get sad. You have to learn emotional regulation at a very early age as a resident, because otherwise things can escalate.
Yeah.
In a hospital, things can escalate so quickly because everybody's emotions are on edge. So you need to be very calm. You need to be the calmest person in the room at all
True.
points. Otherwise, things can escalate. And so, if all the patients' lives depend on you being calm, then you being calm becomes a necessary life skill. So that is one of the most important things that, being a doctor taught me, that all things get better when you are calm.
And what has seeing death taught you about life?
Mm, uh, Honestly, I feel that death is inevitable. We all know that somewhere. Logically, we all know that. But it's one thing to know it theoretically, and another thing to feel it or see it every day. So I feel that seeing death happen in front of me so much, somewhere did get that thought really sunk into my head, that
Hmm.
what, this is going to happen. It's going to happen to everyone I know, and it's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
It is inevitable. There's really no sense in not acknowledging that fact. But it also means that there is some life between now and that moment.
Yeah.
We don't know how much, but there is some. So whatever there is, we should try and do something out of it. We should make something out of it, right? So not to make it too grand a thing, because that's also a sign of ego, that I will change the world. No, that's not really on you, but you can make something beautiful out of whatever time you have. So let's do that. So that, I think, that is also part of what gives doctors that sense of calmness, because they've seen this so much. They feel that whatever they're doing is valuable. They're helping
Yeah.
people. So for me,
Yeah.
that was also a big it made me feel better, that
Yeah.
whatever I'm doing in my time is helping at least one person at a time.
Yeah, and you're not just doing that, you're also through your podcast and through your YouTube channel, I think you're changing many lives, many more lives, many thousands and lakhs of lives, right? Where I think when I got onto your YouTube channel, I saw so many topics which I was intrigued by, and you're giving extremely insightful nuggets for people to take away and also start to think about and reflect and introspect. Because, like you said early on in the conversation, that's a very important skill, reflection, because then that allows you to live life more thoughtfully and
Right.
meaningfully. And to what you said, which is this gap between you're alive today to when you will die, the change will that you leave behind is going to happen because of those moments that come together, where you have made those meaningful contributions, not just to yourself but also to the world in your own way. And I think you're doing that a lot by just sharing your learning. So please continue
Thank you.
doing that. And I know death is a very sort of morbid topic, but I'm always very curious about it, because I think for me, when you know that the end is coming, or rather, like you said, it will come, if you think backwards from there, you almost try to believe or try to write down what you would like to be remembered by. There are
Right.
always these various exercises, that what would you like your tombstone to read, or what would
Right.
you like your friends to talk about or say about you, when you moved on to the brighter world, or to the next world. And I think for me, that's been a guiding factor in making some of those choices. Do I make the tougher choice, or do I make the easier choice? I did hear you talk about earlier in another podcast about how there is a tendency to stick to the easier things, because
Mhm.
the easy things are what we have been tuned to take to, whereas all the good things for us seem to be tougher, right? French fries is not good for us, it's the easiest thing to do. Having karele ka juice is the tough thing, but wo train karne mein jaan nikal jati hai, right?
Right.
So any do you think that that is always a good rule to catch on to in life, that if something is difficult, that's something I should learn and push for? And how does that play out in just mental well-being, right?
This is a bigger question on resilience, I feel.
Yeah.
That when we go through life, especially if you are born in families that can take care of us, initially we might not really understand the need for resilience. That only comes once we are older and we start failing at things.
Hmm.
that this realization starts dawning upon us that, oh, things may not always go according to our plan. And we may need to reinvent ourselves again and again and again. And that requires resilience.
True.
I feel like that is a skill set that people do develop, but to different degrees. And I really believe that the the amount of things that you can achieve in life is a function of how resilient you are. That
Very true.
how much can you take, and how many times can you recover?
Yeah,
And everybody has an upper limit to resilience. Nobody is invincible, but
sure.
how resilient you are will 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 go a long way into how far you go.
Yeah. And that links back to how uncomfortable do you make yourself feel, because
Correct.
then that allows you to build that resilience in
Correct.
a way in your life. I also want to talk about, artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
That's what everyone's talking about. Work in the tech field, and it almost seems like all you need to do is just build learning models and just replicate the mind. And once you
Mhm.
have those learning models, you will be able to create that artificial intelligence like a human being. I mean, I think there is much more to it. And so, I really want to understand what's your take on AI and why will human beings continue to have an edge?
So it's interesting what is happening now because it has never happened before. Up till now, the main bottleneck for knowledge transfer was the speed of knowledge transfer.
True.
So 5,000 years ago, if one person knew something, he would have to go and physically tell this to somebody else,
Right.
right? And so that knowledge transfer was very slow. And then we had the written word, and then we had the printing press. So one guy can talk to thousands of people through his books. And then we got
Yeah.
the internet. So now everybody is connected. But till now, it's still knowledge transfer. It's not on how to think. People will take that knowledge and then they will think themselves.
True.
So when my dad, he was a doctor, and he's a doctor, and when he was a medical student, he had to do his thesis. He had to physically go to the library and find articles that he needed for his thesis.
Yeah.
By my generation, I could search for it online. So
True.
what would have taken him 6 months took me 6 hours, because everything is searchable.
Yeah.
But till now, it is still the speed with which I can gain knowledge. In the end, I have to do the thinking by myself. What is
True.
happening now for the first time is that I don't even need to think. That AI is not just telling me what information there is, AI can write the thesis for me.
Yeah.
And that is a different thing. For the first time ever, it's not just about finding information, it is about finding the finished product. So that is different, because now, what does the student need to do now? What is the student's role?
Exactly.
Right? So this is why it is unprecedented, because we've never had things think for us so much. Even calculators, they would calculate, but in the end, when they give us a number, we had to think about what to do with it. But now,
Correct.
more and more, that is out of the question.
No, and also all the grunt work taught you so much, no? The skills you
Yeah,
spoke about, which is resilience, which is being uncomfortable,
yeah,
pushing your limits, building newer patterns in your brain.
yeah.
We are not doing any of that, because all I'm doing is saying, can you write a thesis for me on this topic? And it just
Correct,
pops up an outcome for me. And so,
correct.
therefore, I'm worried about what impact will it have on the human mind? What impact is it going to have on human skills?
Yeah.
And what will continue to give us the edge? What do you think is going to continue to give us the edge?
The biggest thing I feel, the change that would happen is, what do we value? So far, knowledge was valued based on the difficulty in obtaining it. So my experience as a neurologist was is valued because it took me 15 years to obtain this knowledge. I had to study 15 years to get it.
Yes.
Now, technically, somebody with zero amount of knowledge could still ask ChatGPT to give me exactly what to do when this is the problem, or give it the symptoms, and then ChatGPT can give the diagnosis and then the treatment also. And I have run this experiment and it is actually surprisingly close.
Really?
Yes. So, not that I would recommend anybody do
No,
this,
no,
but then
but tell me what happened. I'd love to know.
I asked ChatGPT and Bard. So this video is out on my YouTube channel now, by the way. That I
Okay.
asked both of them questions that technically a neurologist should be able to answer. And I asked both of them to deal with, say, a patient with migraine. I asked them to diagnose a certain case depending on what they came with. I asked them
Okay.
specific questions of what treatment would they give, and not bad. If those answers were given by a medical resident, I would pass that resident, during an
Wow.
exam. Yeah. So
Interesting.
it is. So there is a lot of changes that are going to happen in the next 10 years in health, in art, in HR, because a lot of conversations that needed human intervention can now be done by artificial intelligence, by these large language learning programs. I
Yeah.
think they're called LLMs, large language
LLMs.
models. Yeah. So they
That's
can
right.
they can do these conversations. So the main difference would be how much do you value this information. So would a neurologist be respected in the same way? Would a top negotiator be respected in the same way if everyone has access to that same kind of knowledge?
Yeah.
It's an interesting space, and I don't think anybody needs to be scared, but we do need to be aware that this is how value will change, and it can affect pretty much everyone in on earth.
Sure.
So we're all kind of in it together.
Yeah. No, so then are you saying that a lot of the value then will lie in making a judgment? And then also it will lie in what my intuition tells me to make that judgment. And I also want to know a little bit about what do you think about intuition? How do you think it's important to hone your skill? Have you had moments where your mind is telling you something and yet your heart or your intuition is telling you something else? And how have you dealt with that?
So intuition is just your brain calculating probability, but
Interesting.
at a level where you are not aware of all the variables. That's what
Okay.
intuition is. It is just like you are calculating something consciously, but you're not aware of all the variables. So when you're driving,
Hmm.
you are calculating that you have to take this turn. That's your conscious calculation, but your subconscious mind is also processing a lot of information that you are not consciously aware of. So sometimes a child running from the side of the road would have entered your subconscious, you would have calculated it, and you would have hit the brakes way before you're consciously aware. And then
So
you'll look
true.
around and then you'll find that, oh my God, I could have hit that child. And I intuitively knew to stop the car. So
Yeah.
that's what intuition is. It is just calculating probabilities when you are not aware of all variables. And it is a skill that people develop as in a particular field. So I might be very intuitive when it comes to medicine, but if I were playing football, I might not intuitively know where to go or where to
Hmm.
run, whereas
Hmm.
Cristiano Ronaldo would know. Like he would make a run even if the ball was on the other side of the court, other side of the football field, because he intuitively knows that this person is about to pass that ball there, and so he will run, and then by the time he reaches that spot, the ball will reach that spot. So that's what intuition is. I think it's a lot. It's very similar to flow state. Like the more you do something, the more intuitive you become.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think hopefully we'll still have that edge
Yeah,
over
let's hope.
LLMs so that we can thrive. But this has been a great conversation, and we've spoken about so many topics, and honestly, each one of those can take an hour by themselves. And I wish I had that much time with you, but I can tell you one thing for sure that I think we'll be having many more of these conversations with you, and please keep doing what you're doing because I think everyone is learning. I personally, I have learned a lot by listening to your videos, and you are constantly adding different facets to yourself, where you invested so much time to become a doctor and you're changing people's lives. Now you've pushed yourself to also become a podcaster and a content creator, which is absolutely fantastic. And I'm hoping to see what you do next. If there's anything that you can share with us on what next, and we'll wrap it up with that.
So a couple of things that are happening is that I'm very focused on getting kids to understand how their brain works. So, like I said, there are certain tools
I
that
love that.
I believe children should be taught, and I would like to do my part in that. So, one thing that I'm very keen on doing this year is to bring neuroscience to schools. So we are working on that. We are trying to create a program where we can teach children and also parents, because I believe that children grow along with their parents, especially
True.
new parents. They have they have equal amount of things to learn as their children.
Yeah.
So both parents and kids need to understand a little bit more about how the child's brain develops. So that's something I'm very excited to do this year.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to be tracking you and following. And if there's anything that we can do to get this to many schools, or any way we can contribute, I'd love to do that. But thank you so much for the chat, Sid. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for sharing all of your insights on these various topics. And we'll keep talking. Thanks a ton.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pragya, for having me on. Looking forward to speaking with you again.
Amazing.